from Link Cycling. Today we're going to talk about how to set up a dash strike saddle. If you're coming off of a traditional saddle, something like this, or even a more modern stubby saddle like a Specialized, San Marco, Shimano, any other brand out there that has a stubby saddle, setting up the strike is a bit different. So you can have really great luck with these, really comfortable, but you need to make sure you set it up right so that your initial impression is really great. Okay, so how you do that is, first thing we want to do is measure our current saddle height of your bike seat. So if you have a tape measure, that's great. You also want to use a digital level. This is a good way just to make sure that when you're setting up your Strike 9 for the first time, you get it into a familiar position that you're going to be comfortable with. So this saddle's almost at level, 30 degrees. If you have a laser XY tool, that's even better for doing some measurements, or you can use a tape measure. So in this case, our saddle height is nearly 76 centimeters. You just want to make sure that when you're measuring it, you're really consistent when doing it. So a really simple way is to measure from center of bottom bracket, go up through the seat post, right to the top of the saddle, and just, you can eye it across there. And we're nearly 76 centimeters. You can find center of the saddle and measure to there, just as long as you're consistent with it from saddle to saddle, like. Okay, the next thing we're going to want to measure is a saddle setback. You can do that with a plumb bob and a tape measure. And you're just measuring the distance behind the bottom bracket or forward of the bottom bracket, which will make setting up the strike easier. In our case, we're going to use our XY tool because it's way easier than using plumb bob and a tape measure, and it's quite a bit more accurate. So we are 7.5 centimeters behind the bottom bracket. Now we can go ahead and put on our dash saddle. Okay, once you get the saddle loosely on here, first thing you want to do is make sure you kind of get it in roughly the right position. So you can do a quick measurement of saddle height to check where you're at. So this saddle is going to be a little bit taller than our previous saddle, so we're going to have to drop the saddle height down a little bit. We are right in the right area, almost 76 centimeters tall. This one's a little lower though because the saddle has a little less padding on it, so you're actually going to sit on top of the saddle as opposed to the saddle sitting in you. So this saddle really does support your hips really well. It's not uncommon to having to drop this saddle just a little bit. Make sure you're not overextending your leg extension. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is kind of get a good idea of where our setback is. So we are 9 centimeters of setback here. This saddle is going to have more setback than your typically your stubby saddle or even the traditional saddle. So our previous setback was 7.5 centimeters. This is pretty good. We're actually going to leave it right about here. It's not uncommon to having to go 2 to 3 centimeters further setback than a traditional saddle. If it's coming off of a stubby, you can leave your setback. You can try it at the same setback, or maybe go back another centimeter or so. So what you're going to want to do is when you tighten it down, we're going to really want to pay attention to how the saddle is being leveled. So with the saddle, if you look at it from the side, the saddle is pretty level up top, and then it falls away to the nose. When we check level here, you really want this saddle to be level right up top. You might come up maybe a few, like no more than a ½ degree nose high here. If you start to come up too much more than that, then it's going to really limit your pelvic rotation. So right now we're pretty much level, and the saddle here falls away to the nose. So this is a really good place to start to see where you like your saddle. When you sit on the saddle, your hip is not going to sit any further than where the padding is. This extra bit of saddle back here is only to make the saddle UCI legal, so you don't actually sit on that. So when you sit on the saddle, you're sitting only on the forward part of this saddle, or the front quarters, or a little bit more than that. You can see on the saddle where the padding ends and falls off towards the back. This back part right here is only to make this saddle UCI legal. The rest of the saddle is what you use. So if the saddle is too far forward, and you sit on here, you're going to feel the wings on the inside of your thighs a lot, and you'll feel the padding coming off where your hip won't be contacting. The other thing this saddle does is really rotate your pelvis forward. So if you're trying to sit on the saddle like a traditional saddle, sometimes where you can easily sit more vertically, this saddle won't let you do it. And typically when somebody tries to do that, there's an acute pressure on the ischium, specifically maybe the tuberosities. But it's very acute. If you feel acute pressure, it's probably because your hip is rotated too far posterior, or you're sitting very vertically on the saddle. It's a very acute feeling. Typically people don't like it. So how this saddle really wants you to sit is with your pelvis rotated forward. That pressure is spread out over a larger part of the ischium. It's very comfortable, and it feels like your legs are floating, and you don't really feel too much saddle elsewhere. The other big thing is if you slide too far forward on the saddle, again, the pressure gets very acute, and you don't have much support. If you sit too far back, you can't really do it because there's really no place to sit back here, and it gets really wide between the thighs. So that's kind of a good baseline to do it. When they're set up correctly, they're really comfortable. If they're off a little bit, they can be pretty brutal, or marginal at times. So that's it. Bye. So when these saddles when you're adjusting these saddles, sometimes little micro adjustments can go a long ways and have a large impact. If you're not comfortable doing that, find a fitter who is comfortable adjusting these saddles. If it's your first time, you might be doing a lot of little adjustments with it. Sometimes you can hit it right off the bat, but otherwise it's a great product.